Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk 2 of the Reproducible Immutable track. Thank you for coming, especially the talk right before lunch. Here, introduce Sam, great friend of ours, great guy, and Sam of White Fox, correct?
Yes, yeah, I work for White Fox Defense Technologies.
Yep, and here we're here to learn about how NICs can be used in education. And without further ado, let's take it away, Sam.
Sure. Hi guys, my name is Samuel Raumin. Sorry, I didn't really want to mess that part up. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to be kind of talking about a couple different topics, ideas, mostly kind of discussing what the kind of main gig is here, why I'm here to talk about it, more kind of like my experience in school, and then we're going to kind of keep rolling over. So maybe just a little bit about me first. Why wouldn't that work now? Okay, there we go. That's fine. So a little bit about me. I am an electrical computer engineering major. I just recently graduated from Cal Poly Pomona, so I got the double major in both. Thank you. Thank you. I have been a very avid Linux user for maybe 6 years. We're going to kind of talk a little bit more about how I sort of got into that in a little bit. But I like working with hardware. In fact, that's actually how I kind of got started, was I would kind of break devices apart and kind of learn what the individual components do. And then when I actually went to school, I was able to figure out what it actually, those little copper coil inductors do, different stuff like that, how we can build them up to make really unique machines. So as you can guess, that's what I do for my job. I do hardware design, circuitry design, but I also have a background in DevOps with a capital O instead of a D. Somebody who taught me that the other day. But I have a background in cybersecurity. I got into that when I went to Cal Poly. I was initially introduced to FAST, but then I went with MISA and Swift, and I kind of got the whole spiel from everybody. So I was kind of just an anomaly who sort of kind of drifted across all of those different clubs because they all, I was more connected to the people than I guess the entity of the club. I'm a huge Evangelion fan. Like I really like Evangelion. Probably, I don't know, I'm not a depressed person, I just like Evangelion. But I've always been really interested in running stuff on servers. So that picture of me in the bunny suit was actually on Halloween when we deployed 2 servers in our dorm closet. And then they promptly told us to take it down because they thought it was a router. And I was like, that's a huge router. So I like cats, whatever, long walks on the beach, whatever you put on the main track or whatever the case may be. So I kind of wanted to sort of go into how I got into Linux, and maybe you'll be able to relate to this, maybe not. Originally when I got into computers, I have a writing disorder known as dysgraphia, so I can't write in linear print. It's not, basically over time it gets so immutable that you can't even like recognize it, you can't read it. The main way that I actually am able to do some handwritten notes is via cursive. In fact, if you got something from me and it's not from cursive, then it's probably not for me, right? So when I was kind of first discovering computers, I got kind of tired of Windows pretty quickly, right? As you could probably imagine from everybody in this crowd. It's a pretty easy thing to say to this crowd. But the cool thing about it was that I kind of got into Linux. And my first operating system that I ever got into was Ubuntu, right? I mean, so for about a week, and then I was like, I want something harder, so I went to Arch. And then I was like, this is too hard, go back, right? And so through Arch, though, I began to kind of understand the front end. I wasn't super interested in the back end quite yet because there was just a lot of stuff I couldn't see. So when I say front end, I literally mean the actual stuff that you see. The first Reddit subreddit that I ever joined was r/Unix porn, which is, I know it sounds bad, but it's just a bunch of people who are posting their dot files, right, their configurations on how to make their Linux look gorgeous beyond the KDE Plasma, GNOME build, whatever the case may be. And I was immediately interested in this because there was like this idea of dynamic, tiling, static stuff. How do we make things work, different kinds of behavior, really making this well, some of the builds on here are kind of like borderline esoteric. You would never want to actually use some of these builds as your real desktop environment. But it was kind of cool because it was like kind of going through like a Porsche dealership. You can't afford it, but you can pick parts off of it and build your own Porsche, right? It's probably going to suck, but you can have this really cool looking Porsche. And that was kind of the deal, is that it's the idea behind ricing. You're not necessarily making it run better, you're just making it look cooler, right? And that actually does stem from cars. But the biggest thing was that I got into it because I was like, oh, this is super cool, like I really like making stuff. And then I realized, I'm like, actually this isn't quite the end. In fact, it was just kind of the tip of the iceberg for this whole thing called Linux, right? And so I began to kind of realize that you can actually do development on this operating system. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, and I'm not really a super big developer, but I like developers, right? I like seeing people make new software. I'm always the one who loves finding new software. I mean, I find a pride sort of in telling people, oh, look at the software you've never seen before. It's awesome, right? There's something to that for me that makes me just kind of giddy. And the idea behind that, and I guess maybe the kicker of this presentation, is that I like to help developers develop, right? Because I'm not a very good developer, but if I can help other developers be good developers, and therefore you can make me stuff, right? And that sounds really kind of back and forthy. You scratch my back, I scratch yours, and you're right, it is. I'm not going to cut it that way. It's just I like being able to support people who can make really cool stuff. And then through that, I can learn through you guys, the much more intelligent folk, to be able to make these really cool pieces of software that I can utilize. Now, how did I develop this mentality? Well, it was when I went to college. I had a lot of interest in helping. Yeah, I love XKCD. I had a huge interest in understanding how to create these environments, because I had all these professors, all these, different kinds of students, whoever, who was coming to me and being like, I need to get this running, how? And I'm like, it beats me, right? But I'm using Linux, and I think I know how to do it, so I'm going to figure it out. And through that, I began to kind of find this track record of how I can make it easier to get from point A to point B without thinking too hard. And so the idea was how it originally went when I was first kind of talking to a lot of the people at my school and that kind of stuff, especially for like my senior design project where I was mostly kind of working on configuration. It kind of went as this. It's like, hey, we want to put stuff in a container. And we'll discuss what a container is for those of you who don't know, right? Can you do that? So they would come and ask me that. Because I did, by the time I got there, I had some experience with Docker, kind of knew how to run some things, some services. I had a Proxmox server, right? I mean, like, just whatever, right? Like, I was running all this stuff, just kind of trying to figure out how to do things. And I was like, sure, yeah, of course, right? Like, yes, I can build you a Docker container. I'm like, that's, but do we have like a code base? Do we have like an already pre-existing environment, right? Like, do we have something that I'm working with here, right? Like something, because the idea behind Docker is that I'm running a service with everything that it needs. And they were like, well, you can do that part too. You can build the code and the whole thing. Actually, just make the project. I'm like, what? I'm like, this changed. So it was more kind of the idea, Docker originally was introduced to me as an idea of people wanting to use it, but they didn't really know what it was. And I was like, and what it's used for. And it was just kind of like a buzzword sort of thing. And especially in cybersecurity, that happens all the time, right? But for some reason, I had a bit of an interest in this, kind of, in this like, thing, right? Like I wanted to understand Docker. So obviously when they would tell me something like that, I just kind of look at them like that, right? Because I'm just like I have no idea what you're talking about. So, but it was clear, very clear, that when they were coming to me, they wanted to produce a reproducible, scalable environment. Okay? Why? I don't know. Okay? They just wanted me to make it so that it can run on 2 VMs instead of 1, right? And I'm just like, okay, cool. We can get behind that. And that was very solvable, right? But the idea was that I needed to kind of understand what exactly goes into an environment. What are packages, right? What are these containers, right? And so I learned, right? Like I began to kind of understand what exactly it was. And like I said, for a while, a bunch of people were kind of talking about what a container is, right? I mean, like we had tons of jokes about this stuff, right? Like it was just, most people wouldn't really necessarily know what a container was. They talk about it, but it's be like, how do I do it? I'm just like, hard, right? I mean, like because you have to have this environment, you have to have this whole thing kind of set up, right? Like I mean, how do I explain to a person who's just trying to get into this deal what Proxmox is, what Docker is, what is Linux, right? Like how do I explain literally all this stuff? How do I explain the fact that Proxmox is running as a service in a Debian container? So technically Linux inside Linux, Linux inception, that's meta, right? Like you can't explain that to somebody very easily, right? Because it's just not a very, it's not something we observe in our day-to-day lives, unless you're me, and you're cool, or you have nothing else to do, right? So it was kind of like the joke. We would just kind of say, I love Docker. I mean, we would just spam that like we were just a bunch of, like schizophrenic, right? It's just I love Docker, right? Like I say AWS, just we would just say it because they were just buzzwords to us. So this idea of having a reproducible environment is super important for anybody, right? I mean, even in those scenarios where you're just necessarily working with yourself, right? Like that lone wolf scenario, you don't necessarily want to go out and say. You don't necessarily want to go out and say, I want to develop it all myself and it's my own container. I'm like, okay, well, okay, you little hunchback man in your attic or something, right? But the idea is that you should be able to let other people use your software. So that's the idea behind packages, containers, all that kind of stuff, right? You're creating an environment so that you can do stuff, right, that somebody else did, or you can start to do something that other people can copy later, right? I mean, that makes a lot of sense, I hope. So the idea is, okay, I'm talking about all this container stuff, and probably some of you are like, you're starting to sound like the exact same problem that you were talking about, and so I will explain it to you, because I'm nice, right? I will explain to you what exactly a container is, okay? And the idea is that this really wonderful graph that they gave me tells me a couple different things. That we have these individual containers that are managed by a computer, this Docker host. There's some kind of daemon process. It's just a process, right? Like daemon is just a special word for it runs something, it does something, right? And we have these images that we can pull. So we could use Chubuntu or something else, right? And we can pull those into these containers to emulate an environment, right? Because I don't know if any of you guys have ever actually seen like a Docker build file, but the first thing you have to specify is the image that you are pulling from, right? So whether it's Ubuntu or Alpine, my beloved, and like basically any kind of image that is supported on Docker. And then you literally go through and tell it what to install. So you as a developer, the primary developer, have to understand what packages are required for your program. But the cool part is you only have to do it once, hopefully, right? If you set up the Docker container correctly, yes, you can set it up once, you're good to go. It's like, just slap the tape on it and you're good to go, right? You have this literal thing that just works, and it's built exactly like the developer intended. Now, there is some transparency issues. Sometimes the developer doesn't know what packages are just working with your program or not, and that just happens. Right? I mean, that's nothing, no problem. But that's the point of, building the container until it works, and then you can ship it off and you're good to go. That's why they call it like, they put Docker in like a whale with like containers, because it's like shipping it off, right? You literally have this prepackaged thing. That's the idea, right? So, kind of nifty, huh? And so yeah, that's the same idea. You have a Docker file, you tell it to build it, it builds it, takes a little while, but once you're good, you have these set of images that you can pull to create containers, right? And what it does is there's a lot of kind of extra magic that I'm not necessarily talking about, nor will I, because you guys can, take a look at it. But essentially the idea is that if you ask for something, like with a specific tag, like say, well, actually, we'll go into that in the next one, but in the next few slides. But the idea is that you can pull like the latest version of some software, builds it, hopefully it's there, brings it in, you're good to go, right? And that's cool. But this kind of thing is kind of here just to help you solve. It's a solution to getting a pain in the butt software to get working, right? Because we all have had those, right? I mean, like we've had those programs where it's like, right? Like I literally just installed this libx program to make it so that memory is more efficient and it's not pulling it, right? I mean, that happens, right? That happens all the time to all of us, unless you're way cooler than me and totally understand much more about what's going on in the back process. But for me, I'm just some hunky-dory electrical computer engineer who wants to run Minecraft on his Proxmox server. I don't want to go in and change the Java config every time I have to update to a new version. I mean, I got so good at that I think I could blindfold, change the Java config, and then go back in and just launch it from systemd. I mean, it's just not. So when Docker was introduced to me as like this idea of, doing Minecraft the adult way, I was like, oh, this is super cool. I'm going to keep using this, right? And the first time I was ever introduced to this kind of Docker idea was a program called Street Merchant. I needed a graphics card, bad, right? And that was during a time I did not time it well, because who could have timed a very world pandemic virus, right? So I need a graphics card. I need something to be able to tell me what goes where, right? This program, Street Merchant, which was written by a guy named Jeff, right? He basically wrote a program that would essentially, not a scraper, well, kinda, but I wasn't poaching. I wasn't trying to take, as many cards as possible. I just need one, right? I don't care about the rest of the guys who are selling them at $2,000 a piece. I'm not doing that, right? I just need one, okay? And so the idea was that this program would basically watch a list of websites and tell me if something was available. Cool, okay? If I make the API response, don't make it visit every 2 seconds, because then I'm just gonna get banned, right? Like they're gonna be like, wow, this dude is looking at the graphics card page every 2 seconds. He must really want one. Or bot. And so they were like, so obviously you have to kind of time it out correctly, and that's what this program does. Now, Street Merchant, God bless him, uses Node, okay? And Node is such a painful program language to get going, especially because you go one update over, broken. Deprecated, what do you mean? This was like a main function, deprecated. I'm like, okay, well what, do you want me to just rebuild the program? No, we have something better. So when I went into Street Merchant, they were like, we have our development environment. I'm like, development environment? I'm like, what does that mean, right? So they were talking about Docker containers. I'm like, they had it on their page, like how to do it, how to launch it. And I'm just like, you know what? Let's try it. Let's see if it works, right? What do I got to lose, right? So I install Docker through the Ubuntu thing, then I go in, and I get Street Merchant, and it just works. And I avoided literally all these other errors that people would talk about in the FAQ. Will this harm my computer? No. That was in the FAQ. Will I get banned from the store? Perhaps. But the risk we're willing to take, okay, see, that's how badly these guys wanted graphics cards. I was not the only loser who needed one of these, okay? So, yeah. So, we get the idea, right? Docker is used as a service handler. It handles services. That's great, right? But there's a problem with that, right? We can't, like I was saying before with kind of my fun little, ricing endeavors and that kind of stuff, I can't run that stuff all in containers, right? Like I'm not I'm not going to run X as a container. I'm not going to run my Windows manager as a container. That's just ridiculous, right? Like I'm not going to do that. But I also wasn't really geared towards going through apt, the same kind of apt hell, trying to kind of figure out what packages are required for what. So I met some very wonderful people at Scale 2 years ago, I think, yeah, 2 years ago, who introduced me a very good solution to that, right? Building this idea of a home for myself, right? Because it's one thing if I can build my Porsche, but I need a home, right, to put my Porsches in, right? So where do I do that? Nix. Wow, you couldn't have seen that coming, huh? So, Nix. Oh my God, I love you, Nix. I love Nix. Nix has made my life an absolute awesome. It's made my world way different, right? Because now I can actually focus on understanding what is involved in the environment than actually trying to find the packages themselves. Nix has been great. Okay, I mean, obviously it has its own quirks, which we will talk about, but it's great. And the best part is that a lot of people in Unix porn are actually starting to use it more, right? And I'm like, maybe they're discovering the same problem I did, right? Because the cool part about Nix is that Nix makes it super easy to set these things up. Dot file configuration used to be a pain. People would write their own scripts to install their own dot files, stuff like that. And I remember running that stuff and just stuff would always break, right? I mean, now granted, I didn't always, but it's good to have a baseline, right? The Nix dot file install stuff is build. Done, right? Everything's there, in the right place, right? Wherever it needs to be, in your default .nix file stuff. We'll be talking about what all these files mean, right? But just everything is in the right place. And that's awesome, right? Because that makes my life faster, easier, more time efficient, and on top of that, it's the same thing that we were talking about before. It's reproducible, right? Because, granted, I just did everything from a config. Cool, right? Like, I like that. So NixOS is a very good solution to that. Does it replace containers? Not necessarily, right? Sometimes you do kind of want to spin up a container still or something like that. But this is a pretty good one, right? Like Nix does solve a lot of issues that sometimes containers can even be involved in, right? So let's talk about that, right? Now, for a long time, Nix was kind of scared. It was a kind of a scary thing to the community, right? Like it's not sandwich, right? Like it's one of those things where a lot of people were really scared to get into Nix because it's hard, right? Like it was hard to get into and stuff like that. And, maybe it's because I'm biased, but I think I understood at this point what hard meant, right? Because I was already going through Arch with different kinds of installers. I was messing with core boot stuff. I was messing with all these different kinds of server applications for enterprise stuff. Because all these companies, Fedora, Fedora, Ubuntu, Red Hat, they all had these different kinds of solutions that I did look into, right? But why would you use like literally any of those server-based solutions for your home desktop? It just didn't feel right, right? What are you running as your home OS? Oh, Red Hat? What are you, nuts? Like, what do you pay your CentOS license with that too? I mean, come on, right? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I need something that's kind of homey, something I can relate to. Yes, those enterprise, operating systems exist for a reason, obviously, right? And they have their merit, and they should, because they're good. But there was kind of a problem, like a gap, right, that I was missing. And that was filled with Nix. Now, the best part is that Nix has 3 things that it prides itself on, right? And you can even see it on the front website. And we can talk about it, because to be honest with you, when I first read them, I was like, what does that even mean, right? So, first part, it's reproducible. I hope we know what that means now, because we just talked about it, right? But the idea is, the sum up of the last 20 minutes of me spieling, is that you can do something that starts over again, right? Like it's reproducible. You can go back. You can do stuff. Second part is that it's declarative, meaning that whatever I say goes, okay? So that's really good, especially, and a lot of Linux people really like that. In fact, I think every Linux person likes that, right? because you know what's best, right? So the idea is that it's declarative, but that also means that we can roll back, right? If you flub because you knew what was best or you thought you did, you can roll back, right? And there's a lot of different ways that we can roll back, and we can kind of discuss that. And the best part is that I love this word. It's reliable, okay? And that's a really, 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 really hard pin to hit with Linux, is that it's reliable. Yes, it's reliable in some aspects, okay? But man, the one thing I have learned about this operating system in the many years that I've worked with it's like a fallacy by saying that, right? Yes, it is reliable, but yes, it has issues, so therefore it's not reliable. Is it your fault? Is it the operating system's fault? Whose fault is it? Granted, I'm pretty good at putting the fault on Linux because I'm upset at that moment, right? But later on, sometimes it really just comes down to it was just a mistake I made, right? Just so hard for me to admit, right? So let's talk about what Nix can do, because I think I really do need to kind of put off how easy it is to use this operating system, right, NixOS. Now the best part is that there's this really cool kind of file that sits right here in etc NixOS config file that you could do everything, right? Like you can literally, did I mention, like literally everything about the operating system is right here, right? Like I can define what is built, what packages are in, what service to do it to enable, where to get stuff, how to do things. Hell, I even had a dude who was showing with modules how to set up partition at boot. So it would set up all your volumes and everything all ready to go, right there in that config file. You have, this is your golden ticket, right? This is everything that you want. You want something built exactly the same way as it was before, there you go, your config. And you can build it out from there. Best part is that you can back up this config. I'm assuming you probably all know how to do that, but just to make sure that we have clarity, you can just put that all on Git, right? Pull wherever. I don't care if it's from GitHub, GitLab, you host your own thing, who cares, right? You can just pull it, and there it is. You're good to go. Run nix rebuild, sudo nix os rebuild boot. Reboot, it's all there. And that's great, okay? That is a fantastic attribute. So the idea of this declarative thing that I was talking about, it is literally right there. The proof's in the pudding. Do whatever you want. All right? Now let's talk about the Nix shell for all you developers. Now, so the cool part about Nix shell is that you can create these temporary environments for yourself, right? You don't necessarily need to install, if you're just trying to try a package, you don't want to install it, you don't want it to break stuff, right? Things like that, you can use Nix shell. That's your development environment. And that's what I've used it for. And guys, I've only been using NixOS for 4 months. Okay, I'm not a developer, right? So there's a lot more you can do with Nix shell, but my biggest thing is that if I need to test a package, if I need to test something, I can do it right there. It's really easy. And the documentation is actually really well kept for this one, right? Let's talk about the generations part. So back to where you flubbed, right? You can actually do something in Nix, which is called, so every time you rebuild, okay, you rebuild something at boot, because you can choose whether to do switch, which means it'll do it automatically. Please don't do that with kernel stuff, right? But anything else, service-wise, whatever the case may be, you can just switch it in real time. You don't need to restart the machine, unless you see fit, which is fine. I'm totally cool with that. I like being safe. I'm not that guy who cares if you've been running your machine for 10 years or not, right? You put it in, say something breaks. Oops. Well, that's okay. We can roll back. Go to the last generation before you built. It saves that same state. And what's really cool is you can also set up automatic garbage collection. So if you flubbed within 30 days and you set it up your garbage collection in 30 days, then, well, you're tough, out of luck. But the cool part is that you can set that manually to make it so how often certain generations are held. So this is at Grub, for any of you who haven't seen this before, right? Whatever the case may be, this is like your different boot options. And each one of those are different generations with different build configs. So say I installed NVIDIA DKMS, and it just broke everything, right? Whatever. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go back to the Mesa blob, like a sad blob that I am. And I'm just gonna go to the next generation. I can. Just hop right over. No problems. And I can delete that DKMS and keep crying about how to get that to work, right? So there is a functional way to develop right? There is this functional way that has been set up for you, right? The best part is that Nix can be installed on any operating system. Did I mention that? Right? You don't need to run it on Nix OS. I get it. You know, you're just trying to dip your toes in the water, right? Whew, it's cold, right? You know, that kind of thing, right? But you can still work with it on Ubuntu, Fedora, Mac OS. I've seen it run on all sorts of different things, right? I mean, just it's one of the most wild machine builds I think I've ever seen host Nix on it, and it works, right? Now, there is some things about Nix that we probably should discuss, and I didn't make slides about this because this was kind of a sad topic for me to talk about because I'm a part of that problem, and that is that we are lacking a little bit in documentation. Okay, and I think that's kind of a thing, and what do I mean by that, right? Because I can just say, well, like, our documentation sucks, right? And that can mean a lot of different things, okay? It's not like it sucks in the sense that, you know, you wanted to write this README file, but you kind of forgot to do so. Actually, it kind of is that sometimes. But it's more kind of like, we need more people to help us develop documentation. That's originally why I came onto Nix, the argument that I made in order for me to come speak in front of you guys today, was that we need help doing documentation, right? And I know it's like, oh, you mean I gotta tell people how to use this, right? You know, that kind of thing, but it's actually a relatively important thing, because one, there's two problems that sometimes I find, even with myself, I'm not trying to call out anybody here, but even with myself, that kind of happens when doing this kind of stuff. The first is that the documentation doesn't exist. And the second is that I didn't read it. Right? Okay? And in that order, right? So that's one of the biggest problems that happens with this deal. But in reality, there is some truth to the second one in both ways. First is that I'm an idiot. I didn't read it. And second is that it actually doesn't exist, right? Or it's hard to find, or it's not in the right spot, or it's maybe not documented clearly. I mean, you know, there's some fine details that we can kind of get into, but it's like, but there is a problem, okay? We have this very good solution, really good solution, seriously, okay? I encourage all of you, if you guys haven't looked at this thing, to please look at it. It's cool, okay? I mean, if it's making the dummy electrical computer engineer look good on Linux, then it's definitely going to make you guys look good, right? Making it so that you can build a home requires you to have some instructions on how to build that home. And if you are, you know, missing, I save manuals for everything. My mom gets pissed at me for it. She's like, well, you'll be able to search it up online. I'm like, you're starting to sound like me, right? But there is something to keeping documentation. Now, do I keep the warranty cards? No, I probably should, right? But you know, it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, it's important to have documentation, especially for things you care about. Right? Whether it's my headphones, whether it's, you know, my laptop, stuff like that, right? Like, it's important to have that kind of stuff, right? So, with that being said, I kind of just wanted to sort of go into a little bit more of a pep talk beyond that. And that is the idea that, you know, I said before that I like to help developers develop. And that's real. I really do. There is something so magical that happens when I get to see any of your guys' projects or whatever the case may be, just light up on the screen. It just works, right? It's something that you've spent hundreds of hours on, thousands of hours maybe, on this program that solves a problem that you are passionate about. Because that is one thing that has never failed me in the Linux community, is that every single one of you is passionate about something, right? And that's a good thing. That's a very important thing. Now, granted, what you're passionate about might be a different story, but the idea still stands that you probably should have something that you are passionate about, whether it's Linux, whether it's writing programs for it, whether it's solving a problem at work. And that passion can be stemmed from anything. You feel like it's a problem that needs to be fixed. You might get paid for it. That's always good, right? I mean, I just recently kind of got on that track where now I'm starting to get paid to solve problems. And that's huge, because for the longest time, that was not the deal, right? I mean, I was just kind of doing it by the seat of my pants, and it's like, solution. Was it good? I don't know. I mean, it worked. But that's the idea, is that there's different, what I'm trying to say is that there's different driving factors for how you solve problems. And I feel like those are all important. So when I say, like, I like to help developers develop, I would like to kind of tweak that statement a little bit, and that is to say that I like to help you develop. Because I believe in my heart, honest to God, that when you guys have the tools, the layout, everything that you need in order to get what you want out the door, you can make this world a slightly cooler place, right? Just a little bit. And that's awesome to see, because you all have really cool, well, maybe sometimes you make the problem and then you solve it, right? But I've seen some pretty neat solutions in this community. Very neat, very clever, right? And I want to keep driving that. We all do, right? So, with that being said, I'd like to say thank you.
All right, thank you, Sam. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I was on the edge of my seat for every single second of it. We do have some time.
Yeah, we have
we're
some,
gonna
yeah, we
go-
have some time.
We're going to go around, and does anyone have any questions for Sam?
So how are you going to help the developer? That plan?
Sit there and write it.
So the question was, how will you?
Oh, that's right, I gotta
What are
repeat
your
it.
plans?
Yes, what are my plans?
For helping developers with the documentation?
You got the passion part down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's more kind of like, I'm like a dog, right? Like somebody just tells me to do something, I'll just start doing it, right? I mean, because especially if it's somebody who states their authority, right? Then I'm just like, right? I mean, like, I would, yes, Commander, like I will write the documentation, right? Like, if there's a pertinent importance to it. Yes, I'm trying, right? Like I'm trying to understand, basically just taking a large scale overview of what is the requirements for documentation, how do we set it up, how do we set up synopsises, stuff like that, right? That's all super important, because I'm a huge fan of man pages, right? Like, you telling me I don't have to flip, yeah. You telling me I don't have to flip to another window to read something, right? I mean, like that's pretty, and then it just brings me right back to where I was. That's great, right? And we need more of that, right? Like we need more ways to access that kind of stuff easily. And we're working on it. I know we are. So that will come with time, I believe.
Any other questions?
Wow, you guys are hungry, huh? Okay, what's up?
I'm thinking of like, okay, so I've been like, to full disclosure, I've been like having a brain rot with Nix for the past month.
Yeah,
So
I've been having it longer. Trust me.
it's gonna continue though. I'm having. Have you ever tried to build anything from source and add it as a Nix package?
Absolutely.
And do you think that's something that like everybody should try at least once? Like if there's a package that you really want to have on Nix OS that is not available on the Nix OS ecosystem, how easy do you think it is for somebody to like pick up Nix OS and be like, oh, I'm gonna make a module?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. If you find a package or some kind of software that doesn't exist on Nix, it's already a very large database that I already mentioned, right, that is not on there. Yes, go through the necessary turmoil to basically add it to the, it's actually a lot easier than you think, right? There are guides online that do exist that are very good, right? I'm trying to think of a few off the top of my head, but there are some, right, that do help you get there. And also our documentation, that part actually isn't that bad either. Documentation has gotten better for that part. Because that part's actually important. If people aren't adding stuff to Nix, then therefore, what's the point of using it, right? So yes, that is an important thing. If you are curious about trying it, yes, you should. Absolutely. Because it's actually not too bad. I'm not going to call it easy, because it's not, right, if you've never really added a package before. But if you have a service and you understand how to put that service into something, or whatever the case may be, then I believe you're at a good starting point. So I think anybody can do it, absolutely. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick one about like your opinion
That's okay.
On the future of Nix. Do you think Nix OS and Nix will be as in the future, as a popular tool as something like Docker?
God, I hope so.
I hope so too.
I mean, because I've already put way too much time into this deal for it not to be, right? I mean, to be super honest with you, we'll see. Okay, there's a lot of people who are working really hard. I've met a lot of really wonderful people who have been working on some awesome stuff, right? That have been trying to push it to enterprise, that have been trying to push it to more home base. A lot of people are trying really, 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 really hard to push this thing. I mean, even the other day I was speaking to some of the guys at Framework, and some of their engineers want to get some of their firmware stuff put on Nix. Okay, and Framework. I mean, God, if I could get Nix OS to be a supported operating system for Framework, it's over. Right? I mean, like that's such a huge milestone that because then we're kind of now we're serious, right? Like now we can actually kind of say like I'm on a laptop, right? That you can pull apart and fix stuff with, right? But that kind of follows what sort of everybody in the community is all about. Who doesn't like repairability? So that's always kind of a cool thing. So, any other
Any other questions?
questions? No? None? Okay.
All right, we.
Oh no, I was watching you pick up your bag. I was like,
But by the way, Nix runs fabulously on a Framework laptop. Done it for years.
great. That's good to know. Yeah, because that means that it won't be such a hard, convincing thing to say. So
I will also say all my friends have Nix OS on their Framework laptops.
you're a little biased, though.
All right, let's hear it for Sam.